Hi everyone. This week we've got a mixed bag of things under the category of communication, collaboration and self-management. And this stuff is really important. And unfortunately, it sort of traditionally gets a bit of a sideways shaft in law. And often people talk about these as being soft skills, which is a term I find borderline offensive, really. This idea that the real hard work of law is in sort of doctrinal work, and the ability to actually work with other people and get stuff done is somehow inferior. And obviously, they're both really, really important. You can't necessarily be a great lawyer who just collaborates well and gets other people to do the work for them. Though some people manage to do that. You need a balance of both. And one of the problems, and leading into stuff we're going to talk about later in terms of well-being, I think, is the fact that traditionally the ability to actually get things done has been sort of denigrated within legal practice and seen as something that is somehow inferior. And there's possibly a whole sort of masculine, feminine binary going on there. And certainly there's a sense in which these things are, I guess, yin and yang. And you need both of them, as you need yin and you need yang. You need a complement of those technical, professional, legal, intellectual skills, but you also need the ability to get on with other people, the ability to get projects done, the ability to communicate those things. So we spent some time on it this week, and we don't spend a lot of time in the course focusing on this, but of course it underpins absolutely everything that we do. And certainly if your assessment, if you can't communicate and you can't manage your own time, and in some cases you can't collaborate with others, you're not going to be able to get your assessment done terribly well. So everyone hates group work, let's start with that. But from time to time we're going to expect you to do that, and we're going to expect you to take initiative in getting organised, because these are key professional capabilities. And from time to time we're going to expect you to organise things by yourselves. We're going to set out the boundaries and say you need to find yourself a group and do this. Again, that's really, really important, and it might be daunting. It might be something you haven't done a lot of before, but this is adult education. You can't sit back and wait for us to do everything for you and hold your hand in every situation, and sometimes we'll challenge you, and that's what it's all about, is providing you with a challenge and giving you the opportunity to meet that challenge, supported of course, but this is not a hand-holding process, as you'll see, as you've no doubt seen so far. In terms of collaboration, we're going to reinforce the importance of technologies, particularly on an online course. Your abilities to actually get people together in a room and discuss things is fairly minimal. It's fairly minimal with the online courses, with the on-campus courses as well these days. But it's absolutely crucial that you're able to do things like collaborate on a Google Doc, be able to find ways to negotiate meeting times, be able to use Zoom to organise your meetings. So all those things, again, there's not a binary split between being good at technologies and being good at those soft skills. It's all part of the same system. And we'll hopefully give you lots of opportunities to start practicing those skills, because like recording the video that you did for your portfolio, these things can be a bit kind of daunting the first time. You've never done it before, but as soon as you do it for a few times, it becomes easier. What else we talk about this week? We talk about plain language lawyering. This is something I have, I guess, a slightly ambivalent relationship with, because to one extent, I totally agree that things should be written in the plainest language possible and written in a way that people can understand it. I don't have a problem with that. But I also sometimes wonder whether we focus on having to have everything understandable by lay people to the damage of legal clarity. You don't get this in other disciplines. Obviously engineers have to be able to explain to clients what they're doing, but there isn't the same pressure for all the engineering technical documents to say, well, you have to write this in a way that an average person can understand it, because that's just not going to happen. And if you can hear that, that's the local fire brigade alarm going off. It's not an air raid siren or anything. Okay, and I think about the technical aspect of law quite often when I think about the rules of games. I think there's a lot of overlap between the rules we set for games or in sport and the rules of law. similar. Obviously, they're different outcomes, but it's a similar process. And if you've ever had to explain the rules of a complex board game to friends, you'll know probably the challenges that exist in the drafting arena. Let alone if you actually then put yourself in the shoes of someone who has to explain. They've come up with this wonderful mechanic, this wonderful, interesting thing to put in a game, and they have to then write it down in a way that other people can use. And then you think about, playing board games at Christmas and trying to explain to granddad or to your nan how to play. And you think about, obviously everyone knows how to play Monopoly, but once you move into more interesting games, you then have an uphill battle to explain some of those things, let alone, and this is for the geeky gamers out there, if you think about hardcore Euro games and worker placement games, trying to explain those to other people. So at the end of the day, I think plain English drafting is good, but I think a lot of its advocates oversimplify. And there's this presumption that everything should be explainable to a layperson. And I don't think that is necessarily true. I think law is a technical discipline, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. We shouldn't fill it with jargon and legalese, but sometimes we need to really focus on drafting something that is really clear and is usable by practitioners. Surgeons have certain language to describe anatomy and the tools that they use. And can you imagine being a surgeon and being told, well, you have to explain all the parts of the body and all your surgical tools in a way that other people can understand who don't have any training? It would be ridiculous. Anyway, complicated issue, very complicated issue, and of course people have to be able to understand the laws as they apply to them. But I don't think it's as simple as the plain language advocates often make out. Okay, moving on to the third limb of this week's discussion, well-being. Obviously, there's a lot in the book about it, so I'm not going to replicate what's in the book. Just make some comments. For me, well-being is really about managing stress, and the habits that you get into while you're a student and previous are the habits, good or bad, that will define what happens later on. And I know a lot of people get used to, thriving on stress and doing everything at the last minute and drinking lots of coffee and drinking Red Bull to get assignments done in time. And those are really bad habits that serve you really badly in later life, because as time goes on, your ability to put in those kind of stress fests diminishes. And this is why I think people sometimes get burnt out in practice, is because they've had sort of this reinforcement of this approach where you don't look at an assignment till a couple of days before it's due, and then you do this insane amount of work beforehand and you manage to scrape through, and you go, hey, that worked, I managed to scrape through. Whereas if you plan your time carefully and you allow time to reflect and think about it, it's still stress, but it's you haven't created more stress for yourself by the process. You've managed that particular stress. Okay, a couple of the things they talk about in the book. They talk about mindfulness, and they make this connection between mindfulness and meditation. And I dispute that because I'm not someone for whom meditation works at all. I just get bored out of my brain. Whereas I find mindfulness does work. And, that might be a technicality, and people might say, oh, that's all meditation is being mindful. But let me say that if you find sort of the excuse the expression, sort of hippy drippy stuff around meditation to be daunting, mindfulness is not. Mindfulness is about thinking about your own thought processes, and there are certain techniques that you can practice. And if you're more interested in this, we can give you more resources where you think about why you're thinking in a certain way, sort of meta thinking. But it's being able to reflect on, rather than, and stress is a clear example of that. I'm stressed, what am I doing? Being able to step back from that and go, okay, why am I stressed? What are the things that are affecting this? What can I do about it? So I really recommend looking at mindfulness. And if you're someone who casts a bit of a leery eye at things that have a bit of the stink of patchouli about them, and say, I would never do meditation, or I've tried meditation and it was stupid, don't be put off by mindfulness, because mindfulness is useful. I'm not sure I can say the same thing about positive psychology. It might just be my own particular cynical mindset, but I've found that positive psychology is kind of annoying, and maybe that's because I'm not a good positive thinker. I'm sure it works for some people, but a lot of the positive psychology I've seen, I don't know if you guys have seen the Lego movie. You've seen Unikitty, the bright and cheerful, happy, positive thinking character who takes any kind of negativity or any kind of anger or rage and crushes it down deep inside to the point where it's going to explode one day. I mean, that's my concerns about positive psychology. And I know if you do it properly, you don't do that. But I've seen way too many examples of people saying positive psychology is about always putting a positive spin on things. And when you're a lawyer, you're dealing with things that don't have a positive spin on them. What they have is the best possible outcome. And maybe that's what positive psychology is for lawyers, is looking for the best possible outcome. But I don't think it's necessarily the win-win sort of situation that some of the texts make out. So I think managing stress and well-being, a lot of it is about perspective. A lot of it is, if I can use the analogy to seasickness, and I suffer awfully from motion sickness. But one thing I found that it helped is when people say, keep your eyes on the horizon. Don't look at the sea, look at the horizon, and keep your view on the big picture. And I think that, for me, is something that works with stress, is being able to take that step back and to say, and well-being generally, but take a step back and look at the big picture and say, okay, what I'm doing, the work I work with, it has its own stresses. Every kind of work does. This is how I manage it. In the big picture, it will all be okay. But these are the things I need to do here and now to make sure I do what's appropriate. And there are lots of things maybe I would like to do, and in an ideal world this would happen or that would happen, but we're not in an ideal world. Let's keep that perspective, and let's have a look at what we can do. So I hope that discussion helps, and I'm not becoming more of the problem. There's a reference to Jerome's book in the readings, and I do recommend that. It's the experiences of a young lawyer who ended up in very negative cycles, although he didn't realise it at the time. It's a very, very interesting read. So if nothing else, get a copy from the library, have a read of it, and I think you'll find it's worthwhile. Also, I think one thing that's important about the well-being picture is staying connected. Now, on-campus students have the ability to come to classes every week and sort of stay connected that way, although I think that can be deceptive, and I think the things we're finding out about stress and depression amongst law students might be something that tells us that it's too easy to fool yourself that you're staying connected. You say, oh, I come to classes every week, I'm always on Facebook, I'm very connected. I don't know why I'm feeling so bad. But I guess it's about having really authentic connections and being part of the community. And this is why I always talk about the learning community here and how important it is, because it's important that we actually spread the load of well-being, that we all share in the well-being of everyone else. Obviously, staff can help with that, but sometimes we have 100 to 200 students in a class. It's very difficult for us to maintain an individual focus on every single person. However, if there's a network of community where people can mutually support or mutually provide feedback, then the staff then become an important part of that network and can provide solutions in ways that's not necessarily a ring this specific person and see how they're doing this week. Now, someone else might notice that a few of their colleagues are stressed out by a certain thing, contact the lecturer and say, people seem to be a bit stressed out about this thing, what can we do about it? Figure out a solution, and you deliver a solution to everyone. So that's, I think, the way communities are going to work in the future. And in many ways, what we're doing here in an online law program is a model for what will be happening in the future. Less and less we'll be getting our support and our feedback from individuals who are closely geographically connected to us, but we're going to become enmeshed in these broad divided communities that are divided by geography, but provide a much broader network of support. Okay, so a lot of stuff this week. Not much that can be reduced to a nice set of dot points of 1, 2, 3, 4. But I'm hoping that these are things to start thinking about, start talking about, that are going to be important. And if we get into good habits now, right at the start, then those will serve us well, not only throughout the rest of the law study, but also throughout our careers.